Everyone pictures hell as fire. The Catechism, in paragraph 1035, names something else first, and the word it uses is not flame, not heat, not burning, but separation. The chief punishment of hell, Rome confirmed in writing, is eternal separation from God, in whom alone the human person possesses the life he longs for. And the fires listed second, almost as an afterthought to the thing that actually destroys you. Read that again slowly, because it reorders everything. The image you were handed in childhood, the red cave, the pitchforks, the screaming, was not wrong. It was decoration laid over a wound that nobody wanted to describe directly. The wound is the part that the Church confirmed and almost nobody preaches. A Polish nun wrote down what she saw on October 20th, 1936, and the line most often quoted from her account is the shortest one. "I am writing this at the command of God." The line nobody quotes is what comes immediately after the 7 torments she lists. A bleached, trembling sentence in which she insists that the souls she watched were suffering most from something she had to name last because language collapsed under it: the loss of God. 3 things are inside what follows that most homilies never touch. One is what Faustina actually wrote in entry 741 of her diary, not the summary, the sentence. One is the single description that Catherine of Genoa and Thomas Aquinas and John Paul II arrived at independently across 6 centuries and refused to soften. One is what that means for the choice you are quietly making this week without calling it a choice. If anything in the next few minutes lands somewhere real in you, the small act of subscribing keeps these accounts coming, the ones the Catechism footnotes and the pulpit skips. There is someone listening right now who has already decided, privately, that hell is probably not real, or that if it is reserved for a category of people they are clearly not in. That person is not stupid. They have simply never been told what the Church confirmed about the mechanism. That hell is not assigned by a judge from outside, but ratified by a soul from inside, and that the difference between those 2 sentences is the difference between a doctrine you can argue with and one that is already happening inside the choices you made today. Faustina wrote that she was permitted to see hell so she could testify to its existence, and then she wrote one more thing, that what she saw with her own eyes was a pale shadow of the reality. A shadow. And the shadow alone, she recorded, was unbearable. Which means the part you have already heard about, the fire, is not the worst of it. It is the easiest part to look at. Think of the last time something was quietly good. The light through a kitchen window at 4 in the afternoon. The sound of someone you love breathing in the next room. The first cold swallow of water after a long thirst. You did not credit God for any of it. You barely noticed it was happening. But Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa, was direct about where it came from. Every actual good a creature experiences in any moment of any kind is a participation in the goodness of God Himself. Not a gift sent from a distant warehouse, a direct contact. The warmth was Him. The peace was Him. The flicker of relief when the bad news turned out to be smaller than you feared, that was Him too, touching you through the texture of the world, and you called it luck. Now subtract Him, not the idea of Him, Him. Every quiet good you have ever felt traced back to its actual source, and that source removed forever,
while the capacity to feel its absence remains fully intact. That is the first torment. That is what the Catechism named first, and what almost no homily explains, because explaining it requires saying out loud that the soul in hell does not lose comfort. It loses the substance comfort was made of.
There is someone listening right now who has been telling themselves, half-consciously, that hell would basically be a very bad place. Loud, hot, unpleasant. Survivable in the way bad things in this life are survivable, because in this life there has always been, underneath everything, a thin floor of something holding you up even on the worst day. That floor is what gets pulled. Aquinas called the loss of God the poena damni, the pain of the damned, and he insisted it exceeds every other suffering of hell combined, not by a margin, but by category. The fire is finite in what it can do to a body. The absence is infinite in what it does to a soul made for one thing and now permanently denied it. And here is the part that turns the screw. The soul in that state finally sees, with absolute clarity, what God actually is. Not the distant authority figure of childhood, not the rule maker. The reality every good moment was secretly leaning on. The face behind every face it ever loved, seen at last and lost. Faustina wrote that the suffering she witnessed was suffering of a particular kind. Souls who knew exactly what they had refused, and refused it still, and burned with that knowing. Knowing is the fuel. Which raises a question the saints kept circling and never quite answered the same way twice. If the worst of hell is the loss of God, then what exactly is the fire the Scriptures keep insisting on? And why did every mystic permitted to see it come back using that one word anyway? They used the word because no other word came close. Catherine of Genoa, in her Treatise on Purgatory, wrote a sentence that her examiners underlined and copied out separately. The rust of sin is the covering of souls, and this rust the fire of God burns away. She was not describing a temperature. She was describing a contact. Something pressing against the soul that the soul cannot move away from, cannot flinch from, cannot close its eyes against, because the soul has no eyelids and no skin and no distance to retreat into. That is what she meant by fire, not combustion, exposure. Faustina, 4 centuries later, in a Polish convent with no access to Catherine's text, recorded the same thing in different words. A fire that will penetrate the soul without destroying it. Read those last 3 words carefully. Without destroying it. The fire of hell, in every serious mystical account the Church has examined, does not consume. It reveals. It strips. It holds the soul open permanently in front of the one thing the soul spent its life arranging itself not to see. What it actually is, and what it actually chose, with no shadow left to hide any part of it in. That is why the saints kept reaching for the word fire even when they knew it was inadequate. Because in human experience, fire is the only thing that does to matter what this does to a soul. It gets inside, all the way, with no part untouched. There is someone hearing this who has spent years building a self that almost works. Small adjustments, a version of yourself you can live with by not looking at certain corners too long. Most days the arrangement holds. The fire the mystics described is the end of that arrangement. Not punishment, disclosure. Every corner lit at once,
by a light that is not searching for anything because it already sees everything, and the soul standing inside that light fully, forever, with the thing it refused now visible in its hand. Aquinas called this aspect of suffering connatural, meaning it does not have to be added from outside because it follows from the soul's own state once nothing is hidden anymore. The fire is not separate from the loss already named. It is the loss made visible.
The face of God, finally seen, burning through a soul that spent its life turning away. And the burning is just the seeing. Which is why every account agrees on something the brochures of hell never mention. The fire and the darkness are described in the same breath by the same witnesses in the same vision, not contradicting each other, cooperating. And the way they cooperate is the next thing almost no one explains. Hell is dark. Every account agrees, and every account also agrees that nothing is hidden there, which should be impossible and is the second paradox almost no homily touches. Faustina wrote it without softening in the same passage where she listed the 7 torments. In that darkness the souls see one another, and they see all the evil of others, and they see themselves. Read that twice. The darkness does not blind, it strips. There is no light to see by, and yet every soul stands fully visible to every other soul, and every act each one ever committed is visible too, hung on them like clothing they cannot take off. Picture the worst thing you have ever done. Not the embarrassing thing, the one you have never told anyone, the one you have arranged your entire interior life around not naming. Now picture it visible on you, the way a stain is visible on a white shirt, to every person who ever hated you, forever. That is the architecture of the place. Not a crowd of strangers, a crowd of the seen. People imagine hell as loneliness, a soul alone in the dark screaming into nothing. The mystics described the opposite, and that is why it is worse. Loneliness at least preserves a self that nobody else can touch. The darkness that sees abolishes that. There is no inside left, nothing private, nothing tucked away. The thing you spent 40 years not letting anyone find out is now the first thing every other soul there knows about you, and they know it not with mercy, but with the cold attention of beings who have lost the capacity to look kindly at anything. There is a particular kind of suffering in being known badly, known by someone who hates you and who is right to know what they know. Most people taste a small version of it once or twice in a lifetime and never recover from it cleanly. The damned, in Faustina's account, exist permanently inside that taste, multiplied by every soul present, with no door to walk out of. And here is the part that turns it again. They see themselves with the same clarity. The version of you that you have been carefully not looking at, that you suspected was there but kept arranging excuses around, becomes the only thing you can look at. The darkness is not absence of vision. It is the absence of every kind of light except the one you spent your life avoiding. Which raises the question that runs underneath all of this and refuses to go away. If no judge throws the soul into that room, then how does it get there? And who exactly is the one closing the door from the inside? The soul is. That is the answer almost no homily speaks out loud, and the answer the Church confirmed at the highest level of its ordinary teaching. On July 28, 1999, in a general audience at the Vatican,
John Paul II addressed this directly, and his words were not framed as opinion, but delivered as catechesis to the universal church. Damnation, he taught, is not attributed to God's initiative. It is the creature's own doing, the self-exclusion of the one who has freely refused to open himself to the love of God. Read that sentence as if you had never heard it. God does not assign hell. The soul excludes itself. The door is not locked from outside.
It is held shut from inside, by the same hand, by the same will, by the same refusal repeated so many times across a life that the refusal has become the shape of the person doing it. This is why the version with a punishing judge is, strangely, the easier version to live with. A judge could be wrong. A judge could be appealed to. A judge stands across the courtroom from you, and even if his verdict is final, he is still other than you, still someone who did this to you, which means somewhere in the architecture there is a place to put the blame. Take the judge away. What is left is worse. What is left is a light that simply is what it is, and a soul standing in front of that light, having spent decades adjusting itself, choice by choice, into the shape of something that cannot bear that light, and will not stop refusing it even now, even with the consequences fully visible. There is someone listening who has been carrying the suspicion that none of this applies to them because they have not done anything dramatic. No great crime, no headline sin. Just a long accumulation of small turnings, the conversation avoided, the prayer postponed, the confession put off, the warning quietly filed under later. Each one nothing, each one easily defended. The mystics never described hell as the destination of monsters. They described it as the destination of habits. The slow direction a soul faces, multiplied across 40 years, becomes the direction it is still facing the second after death, and at that moment the direction is no longer revisable. Catherine of Genoa was direct. The soul, separated from the body, goes to the place that already corresponds to it, not assigned, corresponded. Which leaves one question that the next part of this has to answer plainly, because everything turns on it. What exactly did Faustina see, in full, on the day she was permitted to look? She wrote it on her own, in obedience, in a cell in Krakow, and the entry is numbered 741 in her diary. Most retellings give you a sentence or two and move on. Faustina did not. She listed 7 distinct torments, in order, in language so flat and exact that the examiners who later studied the manuscript noted she made no attempt to dramatize anything. The prose has the affect of a witness statement, not a vision. The first torment she recorded is the loss of God. The second is perpetual remorse of conscience. The third is that the condition will never change. The fourth is the fire that penetrates the soul without destroying it, a dreadful suffering, since it is purely spiritual. The fifth is continual darkness and a terrible suffocating smell, and although it is dark, the devils and the souls of the damned see each other, and all the evil of others and of themselves. The sixth is the constant company of Satan. The seventh is horrible despair, hatred of God, vile words, curses, blasphemies. Read the list once more, slowly, and notice what she did not say. She did not say, "And the worst of these is the first." She did not need to. She placed it first and left it there. After the seventh, she added a line that almost no homily includes. These are the tortures suffered together by all the damned. But that is not the end of the sufferings. There are special tortures destined for particular souls. These are the torments of the senses. Each soul undergoes terrible and indescribable sufferings related to the manner in which it has sinned. Each soul, each one, tailored. There is someone listening to this who has been carrying the quiet conviction that hell is for someone else, for the ones in the headlines, for the obvious cases, for people whose lives have nothing in common with the ordinary, decent, slightly tired person they see in the mirror. Faustina's account does not respect that comfort. The souls she watched were not a category. They were individuals, each one carrying the precise consequence of the precise life they had chosen, recognizable to themselves down to the smallest refusal. And then, after the entire list, she wrote the sentence almost no one quotes. "I would have died at the very sight of these tortures if the omnipotence of God had not supported me." A pale shadow, she called what she was permitted to see, a shadow that nearly killed her on the spot. Which leaves one last thing the Church has confirmed, and the next part has to name plainly, not what hell is, but how a soul actually arrives at it. The mechanism is not a list of sins. The Catechism in paragraph 1037 is precise about this. God predestines no one to hell. For this, a willful turning away from God, a mortal sin, and persistence in it until the end is necessary. 3 conditions in that order: turning away, mortal weight, persistence. The third is the one almost no one weighs honestly, because it requires admitting something about the structure of the human will that the surface version of hell never names. A choice made once does not make a soul. A choice made 1,000 times does. Every refusal carves a small groove. The next refusal slides into the groove already there and goes deeper, faster, with less friction. By the time a person reaches the last hour of their life, the direction they have been quietly facing for 40 years is not a position they hold anymore. It is the shape they have become. Final impenitence, the Church calls it. Not a verdict pronounced over a soul, a condition the soul has already settled into so completely that, when the moment comes, the soul does not even reach for the alternative. It is no longer in the repertoire. There is someone listening right now who has been telling themselves there is still time. Not in a careless way, in a thoughtful, almost reasonable way. The confession will happen eventually. The conversation with God will happen when life calms down. The decisive turn will happen when the right moment presents itself, and the right moment will be obvious when it comes. The mystics watched souls who told themselves that exact sentence for 40 years, and then died in the middle of it. The right moment never announces itself. It is always the ordinary Tuesday afternoon you almost did something and then did not. That is what a final hour is made of. The smallest version of the choice, repeated until repetition is identity. Aquinas was unsentimental about this. The will, he wrote, becomes confirmed in the last act. Whichever direction the soul is facing when the body releases it, that is the direction it will continue to face. Not because a sentence has been imposed, but because nothing remains to turn it. The body was the place where turning happened. Without it, the soul keeps the orientation it had at the end. Which means the people Faustina watched were not strangers to the choices that put them there. They had made those choices, in small measure, on countless ordinary days, and on the last day, the small measure had become the only measure. That is the part the Church confirmed, and almost nobody names from a pulpit, that hell is populated not by the people who chose it once, but by the people who chose it slowly. Which makes the question that remains the only question that matters, and the next part has to answer it directly. What is the one specific thing to do with this today, before the next ordinary Tuesday becomes the last one? I told you at the start 3 things would be inside this. The first was what Faustina actually wrote in entry 741 of her diary, not the summary, the 7 torments in her own order, with the loss of God placed first because language collapsed under it, and she would not lie about which one came first. The second was the single description that Catherine of Genoa, Thomas Aquinas, John Paul II, and Faustina arrived at independently across 6 centuries, that the suffering of hell is not a punishment imposed from outside, but a state the soul ratifies from inside, the door held shut by the hand still refusing, the fire not consuming but exposing, the darkness not blinding but stripping. The third was what that means for a choice you are quietly making this week without calling it a choice, and it lands here in the only place it can land, which is the next 24 hours of your actual life. There is one named person who makes this concrete. Faustina, in that same cell in Krakow, after writing the entry, recorded one further detail almost no one cites, that the Lord told her she was permitted to see this so she would tell souls about it, because most of those who are there because they did not believe it existed, not because they were monsters, because they did not believe. She wrote that line with a hand that trembled enough that the script in the autograph manuscript visibly changes pressure, and then she went back to ordinary work, sweeping, kneeling, the cold of the November floor, the smell of beeswax and laundry. The vision did not lift her out of her life, it returned her to it with one specific task. There is someone listening who has been telling themselves they will deal with this when life calms down, and life does not calm down, it just runs out, and the version of you doing the postponing is the version that will still be doing it in the last hour. There is someone listening who has been comparing themselves to the obvious cases and concluding they come out fine on the comparison. And the comparison was never the measure. The orientation of your own will toward or away from God was the measure, and you already know which way you have been facing this year. There is someone listening who is afraid it is already too late, that the grooves are too deep, that the habits have hardened past softening, that whatever there was to turn has already turned. Hear this clearly. As long as you are breathing, the grooves are not the soul yet. The body is still the place where turning is possible, and that is the entire reason you are still in it. There is someone listening who has not been to confession in years, and someone who goes regularly, but has been going around one thing they will not name, and someone who has stopped praying because prayer started to feel like being seen, and being seen started to feel intolerable. The one specific thing to do today is not large. It is one sentence, spoken honestly, in the direction of God.
naming the one refusal you have been arranging your life around and saying out loud that you do not want to keep arranging it. Not the resolution, not the program, the naming. That is the act the soul makes that the soul in hell has lost the capacity to make. Do it before you sleep tonight. Father, we thank you that we are still able to be afraid of this, because the capacity to be afraid of it is the same capacity that is still able to turn. We admit that we have been postponing the one conversation we know we owe you, defending the one corner we know you are asking for, telling ourselves there is more time when we have no idea how much time there is. We have read what Faustina was shown. We do not want to be among the souls who did not believe it. Give us the courage tonight to name, in one honest sentence, the thing we have been refusing to name, and meet us in the naming before the naming gets harder. Do not let us close the door from inside. We do not want to be the hand still holding it shut. Which detail in this stayed with you the longest? Answer in 3 words.
And the next thing worth knowing is what Faustina recorded about the souls in purgatory who can see heaven but cannot yet enter, the single hour she described that almost no one ever mentions.